Welcome to Web Development Lesson 5.1. In this video, we're going to explore how to use the for loop to repeat a process, specifically one to build output to a web page. Before we do that, let's review the structure of a for loop. So a for loop is definitely one of the more complex instructions in programming because it requires an understanding of three components to the for loop. The first one being what's called the loop variable. It also serves as the starting point for our iteration that our loop is going to go through. The next part is a condition, similar to what you might see in an if statement, where as long as the condition is being met, we're going to perform the for loop. So in this case, as long as I is less than 100, we're going to keep executing the for loop. The last part, as in this example, is a mathematical operation, something that changes the loop variable in such a way that it goes from the starting point to a point where it's going to fail the condition in the middle. If the condition in the middle never fails, that introduces a concept called an infinite loop, where the loop is just going to keep going. Hopefully you don't encounter that because that will freeze your program. So now we're ready to go through an example, so let's get to it. And what we have here, we have three examples. We already have the HTML. We'll kind of discuss each one as it goes. So for this first example, all we want to do is build the word, this phrase, I will not cheat 100 times. Now again, you could copy and paste that 100 times, but that's going to be challenging and also tedious. So what we can do is we can use a for loop. So on the script side, we've created functions that are attached to each of these buttons. We already pulled the output, which is a div that's on this side. And we're going to use this variable called build. Not that it has to be the word build, but it's just something I traditionally use when I build output to put to a web page. So that's another key component to this lesson, not just the for loop, but this idea of building output. So I'm going to do a traditional for loop of I equals 0, I less than 100, and then an I plus plus, which is another way that you can increase I by 1. Inside of here, I'm going to do a plus equals, and I'm going to write the words I will not cheat. Now, if you recall, the plus equals, when dealing with numbers, actually increases the variable by the value. The plus equals, when dealing with strings, does a concept called string concatenation. So it's going to kind of do the same thing. You kind of think of it as adding this string to this, and you're going to keep adding it to it. So we run our program now, and we hit this. You can see that the words I will not cheat get string concatenated to the build 100 times, and then the very last line, line 10, displays it to the inner HTML. Now the other thing we can do, just focusing on the fact that when we put output to our container here with an ID of output, we use the inner HTML attribute. Now I want to focus on that idea of the HTML. So that means that we can also build into our output HTML. And now the words I will not cheat pop up on separate lines. If I wanted to, I could also do this. I could also do it, let's not do an H3. H3 is going to be big. I can surround the I will not cheat inside of a heading 3. Again, this is us building output for the web page, and guess what? The web page understands HTML. And there you go. Now you might notice that it skips down an extra line. That's because if you recall, the heading comes with some automatic CSS where it's going to space itself out. So I'm going to bring this back to the version with the BR, and we're going to leave it at that. All right, so let's look at example 2. So example 2 is going to allow the visitor, the user, to control the start point, the end point, and the increment. So up until now, we've been kind of hard coding these values in here. but there's nothing saying that as part of our process, the loop itself gets controlled. So we're going to still start off the same way with an I equals, not 0, I was almost going to say it, I equals start. So whatever value they put in here, that's the value we're going to start at. For the next part, I less than, again, instead of putting like a number like 100 or a 10, we're going to put the word end, which is that variable that's grabbing the number that the user put in this text input. As for the increment, we're going to use the plus equals, equals, and increment by whatever value they put here. Now for this example, we're not doing anything special. We're simply going to build, again, an output, and the output's going to include the variable I. Let me do it like this instead, with string interpolation. So we're going to string interpolate the value of I, and then we're going to put a BR at the end of it. Sorry. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. So let's go down to our example. Let's do our traditional one of like 0 to 10. So we're going to start at 0, we're going to end at 10, and we're going to get there by ones. And there you go. You can see here 0 to 9. Also notice that the numbers are popping up on separate lines. That's because we've put the BR in there. We could change the range of numbers from 5 to 15 per se. And let's get there by increasing by 2s. So you can see here 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Again, we don't get the 15 because 15 would not be less than 15 once we get there. So we've empowered the user to control how the loop works. Again, there may be some scenarios that you require that to allow the visitor to specify where you start the loop, or perhaps more common, how you end the loop or how you get to the end of that loop. Let's explore the last example, which now allows us to kind of integrate this for loop as part of the process. And all we want to do here is simply display the first 10 coordinates starting at 1 that satisfy this equation. So let's start our for loop. Let I equals 1, because that's what it's saying to start at. Actually, let me use a different variable since the process is about an x and not about an I. So now we're going to do x less than. We're going to do less than or equal because we say we want the first 10. So when you start at 1, the endpoint actually has to be included. When you start at 0, you use the less than sign. Again, with practice, you'll know the difference between the two. And we're simply going to get there by increasing by 1 each time. So this is going to give us the values of 1 through 1 through 10, including 10. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to create a variable to represent this process. And I put answer, but honestly, it makes sense just to put the y. So y is equal to x squared. So I'm typing in the formula or the equation that we're looking to display the coordinates for. But notice that because I chose the variable to be the same as the loop variable, this is going to become 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10. All right, now let's go ahead and build that output. And we want to build it in such a way that it actually looks like coordinates. So when you're starting to build HTML output, it might be best simply to write down what you want your output to look like. So this is what I would like the output to look like. I would want the X, then the Y, and then a break so it skips down to the next line. Now using string interpolation, what you can do is you can simply put a $ curly bracket here and a $ curly bracket here. And now instead of displaying the letters X and Y, it's going to string interpolate those values of X and Y that are part of your process. So let's check that one out and go here. And there you go. So you can see here are the coordinates that satisfy this particular equation of, when x is 1, y is 1, when x is 2, y is 4. Again, this might be something that you might see on a calculator when you've plotted this particular equation and you've asked for a list of coordinates from that graph. So in this video, we've only covered certain types of processes, but again, you could put any type of process in here, and in future videos, you will explore other things that you can put inside the for loop. So let's go back to our presentation and review what we've accomplished. So we reviewed the structure of the for loop. Again, the for loop allows us to repeat a process. And as part of that process, because we're doing this in conjunction with web development, we want to build output. And we can build that output by using the knowledge that the plus sign will now do string concatenation, so we can add things to a variable that can then be displayed to the screen. We also explored the fact that when you do output inner HTML, it literally lets you do that. It lets you put HTML on the screen. So things such as H1s, BRs, divs, spans, hyperlinks, images, those are all valid things that you can produce through JavaScript to display to a web page. So hope you're excited about being able to dynamically create content to a web page, and enjoy.